Hello and welcome to SLP Full Disclosure. I am your host, Jennifer Martin, and joining me is my stock photo genius sidekick, Jonathan Carey.
Hello and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year! We made it to 2022.
Yep, barely.
Although I just saw a meme that was hilarious. It said 2020, like 2020 TOO question mark. And it was like, no. So
oh man,
it's 2022. So we're okay.
yeah, that's a good joke.
Yeah, I
Not as
know.
good
There you
as my stock photo pics, so or
go.
videos.
I know. I feel like I need to give a little clarity because, for those of you who don't know, other than producing this podcast and also just basically annoying me any chance he can get, Jonathan is also works in marketing. That's the third thing on his resume besides producing this and annoying me. And so finds the most amazing stock photos you could imagine. And there's some doozies out there.
Yeah, there's some good ones, and by good I mean awful. So
Awful, but I will say I just need to give a plug to you. I'm going to say something nice. Remember I said once a year? I'm going to say something nice, so I'm going to get it out of the way now.
Yeah, it's going to be a long year.
I mean, I just feel like I need to get it out of my system now. But Jonathan is working very hard because he recognizes that the field of speech language pathology has some pretty terrible stock photos. And I'm always like, this is what gives us this terrible reputation that we do just this or just this. So Jonathan is actively working to create a more robust and just more, what would you say?
I mean, more realistic.
Dignified?
Yeah.
Dignified?
That's a nice way of putting it. But yeah, just a lot more accurate photos. So we're in the process of shooting more photos, and we want to show the wide variety of what SLPs do. So
yes. So thank you for giving back in that way, Jonathan. So, whew, I feel like I can breathe again. I get my good thing off my chest, and I can now.
I'll save yours until December 31st. So.
Well, I know, but it's going to be a doozy. I know I'll just anticipate it all year. It'll be what I get to look forward to. So we do have an awesome guest today. And is this the term they use in the biz, Jonathan? This is a two-parter. So this is exciting. We haven't done a two-parter before. So this guest has such a wide variety of knowledge in a couple of different areas that this will be broken up into two different episodes. And we can talk more about that once after I introduce her. But today we have on the show Megan Stewart, and she is a speech language pathologist with over 18 years of experience, most of which have been spent serving students with complex communication needs within a variety of settings, and that includes early intervention, home health, hippotherapy, and elementary school level. Megan received her master's degree from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln and now resides in Florida. With extensive knowledge regarding various forms of augmentative and alternative communication, AAC, from low to high tech, Megan's passion is to help guide students, parents, and professionals alike in their journey to find the AAC systems that will help them become the most independent and autonomous communicators possible. Megan currently works at a one-of-a-kind public center school serving students with autism and related disabilities, and is also extremely passionate about promoting comprehensive literacy instruction for all learners and sharing the love of reading with everyone she meets. So welcome, Megan Stewart. I'm so happy to have you join us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, especially I have to give kudos because I know it's after a long day and you're still willing to do this. So I'm very appreciative for your time and your expertise and excited to learn from you.
Yeah, no worries. Anytime I can talk about AAC and literacy, it's a good day.
Yeah, well, that's a sign that you're in the right place. So professionally.
Absolutely.
Well, before we get started, and just to even begin this, because you do have expertise in two areas that I think are pretty interesting. Well, I know are very interesting, and I know our listeners will as well. So AAC, but then also utilizing AAC and literacy, which is not something we often hear a whole lot about. So this is going to be a 2-part episode. So this first part, we're going to really talk about AAC and dive into that. And then the second one, we'll talk about how to incorporate literacy when using AAC. But before we get started, I always just like to know, tell us about your professional journey and how did you end up where you're at?
Sure. Well, I went to school a while ago. I've been an SLP for over 18 years. And I went to school at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And we had a very strong, and I think they still do, a very strong augmentative and alternative communication program and lab. And so that was part of my schooling, my undergrad and my grad. And I knew it was one of those moments that you just know when you get into it. And I just knew that was where I needed to be. Like something just felt really right. And so I was able to dive into that and pursue that even more during my grad school years. And then right as I graduated, I was able to hop right into a school that served a lot of students that had augmentative communication needs. And so just basically, I've started that since the beginning of my school years and also being out as a professional, and have just really fallen in love with all the different ways that you can use AAC and all the different types of kids that you can use AAC with. So I've worked in elementary schools. I've worked in home health, early intervention. I've also done a stint in hippotherapy where you use horses as the modality. So you're still doing your traditional speech and language therapy, but your client or your student is on horseback. And that was amazing. And right now I'm at a center school that just opened about 6 years ago here in Florida. And we specialize in serving kids with autism or a related diagnosis. And so I would say about 95 to 99% of the students at our school are non-speaking. And so AAC is the heart of what we do for all of our students. So it's always kind of been there, and I've just kind of never strayed. It's just my love. So.
Well, yeah, and that never straying is an understatement because from the beginning until now, I think that's pretty unique that you stick with, you find what you want to do and where you want to be, and then stick with it through this time. But even though I think it's also such a good reminder that you've got this specialty area that you focus on, but you've been able to work with so many in different settings and with different populations, but with still utilizing AAC is the background.
Absolutely. That's always been the backbone of what I've been working on. Yep.
Well, and I'm curious too, is when you mentioned that the University of Nebraska-Lincoln really specialized in AAC, did you know that? Did you do what I did and just kind of applied to everywhere regardless, and then you just happened to fall in love with it? Or did you say, oh, I think I want to do AAC, so I really want to focus and hopefully I'll get into this university?
I knew I wanted to do AAC. I actually went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for my undergrad as well. Okay. So I was there and had experience with them. And that's kind of where I got my introduction to the program. And so I knew that they had a strong program. I did apply to a couple other schools that I knew also had strong programs, but ended up staying at UNL for my grad career as well.
Well, I'm sure the university would be very happy to see that what they specialize in is what you specialize in. So yeah, that's really interesting. I just wondered, what came first, the chicken or the egg? So it sounds like you had a plan, stuck to it, and haven't veered from that. So
nope.
Yeah. And when you got out, you knew I want to do work with AAC. Mm-hmm. Did you, and I have a vague memory because I've actually been out of school longer than you have. And so I have a vague memory of feeling like I had enough confidence to be dangerous with some of this and then had to really learn. So what did you do to get yourself prepared for this and build on the knowledge that you already had?
Oh man, all the PD, all the learning, and I mean, as SLPs know, I mean, our field is just ever changing, and AAC is no different. So we always have those cringe-worthy moments, and I've had them definitely going back because everything has changed. But it's just keeping up with your continuing ed, taking those learning classes and talking to experts in the field and talking to those who have gone before you and really asking those questions and learning from them and watching what they're doing and then trying it. The biggest thing for me was if something felt unfamiliar, I would just try it and see, because you're never going to know unless you just try it. And you're never going to really hurt them. I mean, by trying AAC, you're never going to hurt a kid. You're only going to help their communication. But then it also, you're able to tell what's going to work for one kid because it's also so specialized, not only just from the field of SLPs, but also with each student that you serve. So just because you know about one section of AAC doesn't mean that that's going to correlate necessarily to all of your kids. So you've kind of got to just keep building that well-rounded, support, and just kind of making sure that you're supporting yourself too. You can never stop learning, because if you do, it'll just kind of get away from you. So that kind of, I'm a lover of learning, so that kind of played well into that as well.
Yeah, and that makes such good sense. I don't know why I never really thought about it before, even though I had done some volunteer work with some AAC and realized, this is, as technology improves, these AAC is going to improve. And so you're exactly right. If you don't stay up on what's changing and improving, it would be really easy to get behind and always feel like you're starting from scratch.
Exactly. I remember when I took my first school position and I was programming an old Tobii Dynavox. I don't even remember the name of the model that it was, but at that time you had to program everything. There was no TD Snap app that came pre-programmed on it where everything was laid out beautifully for you. You had to go in and choose what words and choose what symbols and choose the location and all of that. So it's definitely an evolution.
Yeah. If you had that now, you could put it on eBay and
I know.
could make some money on this
probably
antique, right?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
I don't know who would buy it, but there's somebody out there that would buy it. So.
Somebody probably would.
Well, and I do love that, and that's very attainable. That professional development for anybody who wants to learn, improve, that's very doable. And I think you make such a great point as well, that this is not one of those areas where you just, yep, I tried it, I did it, this is it. This is what we're going to go with. That's probably very rare. This is much more an area that if you're somebody that wants to be a detective and really kind of more of a scientist and not have it be knowing it's not going to be a quick, but like you said, trial and error, this would be the perfect area for somebody to go into. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's very much trial and error, like you said, and just going and being flexible. It's also about flexibility. You can't be rigid in your thinking and thinking that you have to do things in a certain way. I mean, you can, but it's going to make it a little bit more difficult for you probably.
You can, but you're going to really start to dislike your job.
Probably, yeah.
And working with kids too, they're never predictable. So it's like you add
never
unpredictable with unpredictable so you're right. You just have to kind of go with the flow and say, okay, maybe I was planning this, but now we have to turn this way. And then, just make like water.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and I know you mentioned working with children who are non-speaking. Who else do you work with, or what other types of children or even adults would be appropriate for AAC? And you can speak to just in general or your practice.
I think I'm really hard pressed, and this is going to sound cliche possibly, but I'm really hard pressed to think of somebody that you couldn't use AAC with. It just kind of depends on the type of AAC that you're talking about. So yes, for non-speaking students, obviously you're going to want to incorporate some kind of AAC to build up that communication for them. But you and I use AAC all day, every day, when we're using our phones and we're texting and we're using emojis and we're writing things down. It's just, when you think of AAC, you can think of it as that broad term. It's really augmentative and alternative. So it's augmentative is the part that a lot of people forget about. But that really goes for people like you and I, or people, students or learners who are already verbal, but just may need a little bit of a supplement. Students with apraxia benefit from AAC. Students with selective mutism can benefit from AAC. Late talkers, anybody that just needs a little bit of help. It's like just learning another language. So, I mean, if you think again about another language with, if you were to go to a different country and you didn't understand the language, but if somebody showed you a visual of a word, you'd more likely understand that visual, given that it was something that was familiar to you. But that's another form of AAC, is just having a visual. So I could make an argument that about anybody that I talk to or that I come into contact with has used or is using some form of AAC. It's just dependent upon the type that you're talking about.
And that's such a good reminder, because I was just thinking of all the times that I've used, for example, text messages to communicate with somebody, even somebody in the same room that is verbal.
Right. Yeah. Or voice text. I mean, all of that. I was voice texting my husband earlier while I was driving. So that's a form of AAC that we use on the daily as well.
Yeah, I was sitting in this restaurant one time out of town, and there was a gentleman who was deaf, and I do not use ASL. I don't know it, other than a few very basic words that I've used with children. And, and so we were texting back and forth to communicate and have this lovely conversation. And so I think that's a really great reminder that we all use it all the time. It's not this one area where only this group is appropriate for it, but you're right. It could be utilized for all of us.
And I like to make that reminder because I hope that it kind of takes some of the scariness or, the intimidation factor away from AAC, because I think that's what kind of holds some SLPs back, or some people back, from wanting to really dive in and try it, or even, like you were saying, experiment with it, because it can be daunting. Absolutely. There are still times when I get overwhelmed with it. But if you sit back and you kind of reflect and look around you and think about your day and what you've seen a lot of AAC, and you've probably used a lot of it yourself. So it's not as scary as it may seem.
Yeah, it is such a good reminder, and it actually will make me think of it differently going forward. We'll be right back to our interview. Take a moment to stretch your legs, but don't go anywhere, because we want to talk to you about our podcast partner, Med Travelers. Med Travelers is an industry leader in allied travel career opportunities for a reason, featuring exclusive jobs at top-tier facilities across the United States, higher earning potential, W-2 employee status, and a flexible schedule. Med Travelers is your advocate for career success. Make sure to visit medtravelers.com to discover how Med Travelers can help drive your career forward. Again, go to medtravelers.com to start your travel journey today. And now back to the show. Now, something that does feel scary and daunting to me are assessments with AAC. And I know you can't, I know this is probably a very much more long, arduous process than you could explain to us today. But just looking at, is there kind of a general formula that you use when you're working with a new student to decide what would be the most appropriate AAC for them?
I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a formula. Again, it's that very much experimentation and trial and error, and trying to figure out for a student how you're almost thinking about how their brain works, right? Because there's a lot of different AAC apps that are categorized differently. The vocabulary is categorized differently. So you've got some that are based off of categories like TD Snap, where you look for animals and there's a folder and then you open up the animals and that kind of a thing. Sometimes that makes more sense to a student. Sometimes they don't want to have to visually attend to that. And so it makes it easier just to, like, if you were to pick up your phone and you know where your apps are at, you have that motor plan set in place. So some students benefit more from just knowing the motor plan of how to get to a word, and that word never changes. And that would be more of like your PRC LAMP-based applications for communication. But really for the evaluation, it's just kind of, it's an observation. There's not a lot of, plus minus data collection that I do. It's more of trying an application, trying a device with a student, trying a language system with a student, and seeing how they do, and seeing which one they more gravitate towards, or having a couple available and doing a lot of modeling for them. So that's where it comes on more of the SLP and the communication partners is, like I was saying, it's a different language. So we've got to teach them the language. We can't just expect them to put a device or a core board or anything in front of them and just expect them to know what to do with it. That would be great, but we would all work ourselves out of a job if that was the case. So it's a lot of work for an SLP as well, and all the communication partners in their environment to really be teaching the students and showing them how they can use that device as well. There's not a step-by-step that I go through for my evaluations as far as do this, check, and moving on and whatnot. But I kind of can get a hunch on what is going to work for a student after typically about a 4 to 6 week trial period with a device. If it's not going to work, you're probably going to know faster, because there are students that in my practice have completely pushed away one device and definitely gravitate towards another. There have also been students where I put a device down in front of them and they have never seen it before, and they independently immediately navigate to something that they want, or somewhere that they want to go, or to do something. So, and it's just kind of mind-boggling that it's just like, oh, well, why didn't I give that to you sooner? So I guess that's kind of a roundabout answer, but it's a lot of experimentation and a lot of trial and error. And honestly, I will say this is kind of veering a little bit off of the topic, but similar, is that there's a lot of discussion about that it's not necessarily the app that you choose or the program that you choose. It's more about the implementation. And it's more about how you as the communication partner, as the SLP, as the parents, as that communicator's environment and community really adopt that as well and model on that and demonstrate it for them. That's what's going to make the most difference, regardless of the type of communication app that you choose or low tech option or anything like that you choose to go with.
Well, and that makes perfect sense, because I'm thinking of so many cases where, like you mentioned, oh, wouldn't it be nice if you just put it in front of them? They started using it and that was the end. Well, and I think possibly that does happen sometimes. And then it ends up in a closet, never to be seen again, or it's not used. Or, I was just talking to one of our clinicians and she said they all have devices, but none of them are bringing them to school. I'm like, well, that probably tells me that they're probably not being used at home either, if they're just, and if they have to dig them up. So I love that point, that by spending a little bit more time and really getting everybody, all the stakeholders on board, that's going to help. And I wanted to touch on also how many times, because I'm thinking as you're talking through this, that you'd probably want to know before trialing, do you want to know how do they do with comprehension? Where's their cognitive level? What do they have any words that they're producing? I mean, do you spend a certain amount of sessions just spending time with them, seeing what they're doing, what they're not doing, or do you try to gather that information from past schools? Like, what's your process with that?
I definitely take time to build a rapport with the student and make sure that they know that I'm there for them. Like that, this is their rodeo. They are running the show. I am just along for the ride. And it's definitely, not anything. And I want to assure them that this is like fun. This is not question and answer. This is not a test. AAC is not a test. And it's not a find the, show me the, anything like that. And as far as comprehension and cognitive level, that I don't take into account a whole lot, because I find with a lot of my non-speaking students, it's hard to determine really what that cognitive or comprehension level that they have is when they don't have a way to tell me anything. Because a lot of my students, the only way initially that they have to tell me something is by taking my hand or leading me somewhere or looking at something. But whether or not another person is seeing them look at that is, another issue, or behavior and anything like that. So until the students kind of understand how they can show me what they know, then I don't worry about any of that. And even after the fact, I don't worry so much about that, because they start to build that comprehension. If they don't already have it, they start to build that comprehension as they're using those words. Just like as, when we start talking and we start, we can say a lot of words initially that we may not understand what those words are or what those phrases mean, but I can verbally say it. So that comprehension and cognitive piece, I don't touch on that a whole lot.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you keep that introductory period very short and really get the most information from when they're actually using devices, whether that's low tech, high tech, to see what you can learn from that and what they gravitate to.
Yeah, I'm very child-led, student-led. I shouldn't say child, I'm student-led. So even if you're not working with children, you want to go and follow their lead. So you want to be into what they're into, right? So if my student wants to play blocks, well, I'm hopping in there and I'm playing blocks. And even if they're not paying a darn bit of attention to me, I am building blocks alongside of them. I'm modeling on the device. I'm doing all sorts of things just on the off chance that, and sometimes it's not even an off chance, I shouldn't say that, but on the chance that they are watching what I'm doing and listening, because a lot of times our students, or my students, I should say, don't have or have a hard time with focusing on more than one thing at a time. So whether that's visually or putting all of their cognitive focus into one thing at one time. So they may not be able to look at the device as well as listen to what I'm saying at the same time. So they may need to do that in segments. And so I'm really just kind of doing a lot of input, a lot of input. And our students, at our school, we have a tier 1 support, basically, of everybody that walks in the door gets a core board that we have adopted as a school-wide core board, and that is modeled all day, everywhere. You can't turn a corner in my school without seeing a symbol. And so I would say that while the introductory period is short, it's also continuous, if that makes sense. So you definitely want to build that rapport before you start really expecting anything out of them. But even with modeling, we're modeling without expectation. So without, I guess, hoping that they're going to give you something. But we also need to keep that up so that they always can build that trust with you and know that it's okay if I don't do it perfectly. It's okay if I don't do it right, whatever that means to the student. Just to build that confidence and show them that everybody makes mistakes. Nobody gets it right the first time. Language is messy. It's very messy, and AAC is messy too. So I would say it's brief, but also continuous.
Yeah, and you make so many. Again, you're full of good reminders to all of us. And as I'm listening, I'm thinking, yes, you're exactly right. I mean, especially when trying something new that they may have never had experience with. That child-led is so important. And I think the other great point you make is keeping it fun. This should be fun because they're kids, and
Exactly.
that quote, "Kids the work of children is play." There's some quote and it's true. They aren't. If it's not fun and low stakes, they're not going to buy in. And then where do you go from there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they're not going to want anything to do with you when you come in their classroom, and they're not going to want anything to do with that communication device because they see it as work instead of communication, and those are not synonymous.
And then it becomes a projectile.
Exactly.
I'm sure you've gotten good at dodging AAC
and
at
catching.
time. Yeah.
And catching. Yeah, exactly.
Preferably catching, right? Versus dodging.
Yes.
And I have a question too, just a follow up to that is, so when you are, and you mentioned before, sometimes with a student, they know you and they both know right away, I don't want anything to do with this one. And so that's pretty easy. Right. But what if they're succeeding to a certain extent, but you don't know, could there be one that's even better for them? Or how do you decide, okay, if this one's good enough, or if there's something that could be even better for them?
That's a really tricky question. I would say if they're showing promise with it and they're showing, acceptance of it. I don't even think acceptance is a good word, but you know what I'm saying? Like they're taking ownership of it and they're really starting to initiate with it. I would most likely go with that system, and not try and get caught up in what if there's something better out there? What ifs, and try not to get caught up in those what ifs. Cause again, going back to, especially if they're starting to catch on and they're getting it and they're using it, by us continually modeling for them and incorporating it into their daily life, the hope is that it's just going to continue to move on, and they're going to, ignite that excitement in us and all the rest of their communication partners. And then we can in turn reignite for them that excitement when we get excited about what they're doing and what they're talking about and those types of things. So I would say if you find one that seems to be working for your students, to run with it and go with it.
So no second guessing. And I imagine too, that every time you change, I'm sure that consistency is key. So probably you don't want to change unless you absolutely have to, even if they're seem even slightly inclined to use it.
Exactly. Yes. Because that's a great point, because the locations of the symbols can change. The look of the symbols can change depending on what symbol system you're going with. So absolutely, if you find one, it's better to stick with that one, and work on that implementation piece to make it stronger.
Yeah. Now, and you mentioned that everybody gets the core board with the vocabulary. Do you have students that you say, okay, we need to stay with something that's a little bit more low tech from now on, or I know that you need to go right to high tech? How do you gauge that?
That is a very fine balance as well. And a lot of times the kids will show you, especially if they're really ready for high-tech AAC and you as a busy SLP just might not have had time to start that trial or implement it. I've had many students that will reach across to their buddy's desk and start talking on their talker. And they're kind of like, excuse me, I need one of these. Or I've had students as well that don't respond at all to low tech, but the minute you put high tech in front of them, they're like, oh, this is game changer. It's almost like they need that voice output that is not dependent upon an adult. And then it clicks for them and they just go. And I've had other students that really prefer the low tech. So again, it's a lot of trial and error and experimentation and exposing them to all different types, because there's extremely robust light tech systems like POD, which is Pragmatic Organizational Dynamic Display, which is like a big, thick book of a whole bunch of symbols, but it's technically light tech because it doesn't have the battery component and it doesn't automatically change pages and it's still smart partner based. So, but it's extremely robust. It's just as robust as a lot of systems. So again, it's just more of what you think the student is going to gravitate more towards and their community is going to gravitate more towards, as well as I am very cognizant of being a busy SLP and what you're able to do within your bandwidth at school. So I have a lot of students at my school, lists of students that I want to get trials going for high-tech devices. And unfortunately, there's only so many hours in a day and there's only one of me. So right now, you just take it as many as you can at a time. And the big thing that I always tell myself, and I tell grad students and I tell SLPAs that I work with, is any AAC is better than no AAC. Because you've got to give them something to experience and to learn from and to be able to talk with them with, so that they can eventually talk back to you with it. Again, that modeling and that input piece. So if we don't give them anything, then we're not giving them any input. So any AAC is better than no AAC.
Yeah. And I think that is, again, another wonderful reminder that you're giving us, because I think it doesn't have to be, we've got to find the perfect one. We've got to find something for them to communicate. And then we can work on finding what that best fit is. But you're right. Everybody's busy. And I'm sure that many people have tried to clone you and it has not worked. And
unfortunately, I've tried myself too.
I was going to say, you may have
I
even
could use
tried
another one of me.
I know. That's why I was like, I need another me too. But yeah, you're right. There's only so much time in the day, and these things take time. So I think that is a very important reminder that what is it? The enemy of good shouldn't be perfect.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
just get started. It's better than nothing. And then you can work towards what that best system is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So now, one more quick question about the assessment, and then I'm going to jump to treatment. So it sounds like because there are so many different companies, and I know some people have their favorites and have the devices that they feel really comfortable and proficient with, but it sounds like you don't have that, and you go by what's best for the student. Or what is your philosophy on the different programs?
I do definitely go with what's best for the student. However, I will be honest and say that I am most familiar with Tobii Dynavox products. Okay. That being said, if I see that, like I was saying, this student is really seeming to benefit a lot from a motor plan based system, like they just want everything to be in the same location, because with other devices, symbols can move as you move through the categories. As far as like orange is like the perfect example, because orange can be a color, it can be a fruit, it can be lots of different things. So on Tobii's, it's in a couple different places. On Proloquo, it's on a couple different places. But on any lamp-based system or PRC-based system, there is one symbol for orange, whether you're talking about food, whether you're talking about the color, and it stays in the same spot. Mm-hmm. So that's where, if you know your student and you know their tendencies, you can kind of pick and choose. But I will say that I am most familiar with Tobii Dynavox. Now, if I offer that to a student, and I show that system to them and they just don't take off with it, I'm not going to like persevere and push through it. I'm going to pivot and go somewhere else and look at a different symbol set, or look at a different page set or something like that. But I typically start with Tobii Dynavox. But again, that's just because that's what I'm most familiar with initially.
Gotcha. I've always been curious about that for those that specialize in AAC. All right. So now once you've got your assessment, and again, I know this is not cut and dry by any means but what would be a typical process? You've figured out the device that's most appropriate. How do you begin planning treatment? What does that look like?
Treatment usually is just kind of, I almost see it as an extension of your trial period, because once you get a trial device and you work through your trial, you've already kind of started your treatment, where you are really trying to just implement that device into everything that student is doing throughout their day. So treatment, again, is just an extension of what are they doing? What do they want? What are they wanting to talk about? What are they wanting to tell you? Like, are they wanting to tell you to go away or leave me alone? Or, you know, and just kind of following along with the student. And really, I just immerse myself in their classroom, in their day. And if they will allow me to, I will model on their device. If they don't allow me to, I will, ideally, I would have an iPad or something that had a mirror image of their device, of their page setup. So it would be identical to their page setup so that I could model on my talker. Because I've had some students that are extremely possessive and they are like, nope, this is mine. You will not touch it. And I honor that. And so then I model either on our school-based core board, or I model if I happen to have an extra iPad that has their same app on it, I will model on that. But treatment is it's a lot of just language treatment, just with your AAC being another modality. So you do a lot of the same things, but also wanting it to be if you're working on those initial emerging communication goals, you're really going to want to make it motivating for the kid. Again, so they're not thinking that it's a test or it's a hunt and find for a certain word. You're just showing them how if they wanted to talk about this environment that they're in, if it's too noisy or what have you, this is a way you could do it. You know, I think you have your hands over your ears. I think you think it's too loud. And then you could just model too loud or noisy, or you want to make it stop and you could just model stop. So you're just kind of thinking outside, like verbalizing what you think that they might be thinking, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense.
To try and give them the verbal words for it, but then also show them how they could use their device to express themselves as well.
Yeah. And I'm thinking as you're saying this, that anything else that we're doing in school-based therapy, it's not necessarily something that's being worked on and addressed all day in their school day. Right. And this is very different. You're right. This is something they're ideally going to be utilizing and working on all day in their school day.
Right.
But I'm thinking in the beginning, when they're just getting used to it, do you keep it to where it's just used with you in speech, or do you immediately involve the other staff, teachers, paras, so that they are using it with everybody from the get-go?
Yeah, once it's there, so during the trial period, I hold it back with myself because my name is on that. And if anything were to happen to the device and it would get broken, I would be on the hook for that. I actually have a couple teachers at my school that might know Toby better than I do, or just as well as I do, so I may leave it in their hands. But typically during a trial period, the device does not go home. It stays at school, and it typically stays with myself. Afterwards, though, once it's funded by insurance or the school system, it is theirs. It stays with them all day, every day. It goes home. It comes back. It is theirs to keep and use all the time. And I am lucky enough that in the position that I'm in, we have support from administration from the top down, as far as it's just an expectation that you model AAC all day long, all day, every day. And so the teachers know that, the paraprofessionals know that, by the time a trial is over, you know, the parents definitely are involved with that if they don't know it already. So once it's theirs, it's immediately theirs all day, every day.
Yeah. So it's almost like as soon as that starts, treatment is all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what would be a couple of example goals that you would write for a student with AAC?
Oh, goals are tricky.
Yeah.
I just wrote 4 IEPs today and I kept thinking goals are tricky. I typically write as far as expressive language goals, and I guess they could be a receptive language goal as well. I like to word them as multimodal goals, which basically, to me and to my team, means that we are providing all different kinds of ways that students could communicate. So we're not pigeonholing them into only using their AAC device. They could use gestures, they could use vocalizations, they could use their AAC, they could use words, they could use all of it all together, because just like you and I, we don't talk in just one way. We don't communicate in just one way, right? So I'm obviously talking all over the place with my hands, and we use eye contact, and we use gestures and pointing and reaching all the time. So we write goals that specifically say multimodal, but we definitely incorporate the phrase of given aided language stimulation or given aided language input. So everyone knows that that's their job, like that's the adult's job, that's the communication partner's job. You have to give them aided language input in order for them to be able to turn around and communicate via AAC or a multimodal approach to give back any kind of communication. And we kind of waver between percentage based as well as number of times per day. And number of times per day, because the ESE teacher, when I write goals, the ESE teacher as well as the SLP are in charge of the implementation and the data tracking. So they know that it doesn't just, like, speech is not an isolated event. Language is not an isolated event. So it happens all day, every day. So we can do number of times per day that they initiate, number of times per day that they imitate. One resource that I like to use a lot when I write goals is the DAG2. It is the Dynamic Assessment of Goals Grid. So it's DAGG-2, and it's totally free. It was written and developed by Vicki Clark in conjunction with Toby Dynavox, and it breaks it into the 4 different competencies, or I don't think they're competencies. I think I'm misstating that, but linguistic, operational, and things like that. So it breaks it down into that, and it gives you ideas for based off of what your students are currently doing with their AAC or their communication. Here's a goal that you could write. Here's an idea of something you could implement into a goal that you could write for your students. So, but I think goals are an ever changing, ever elusive thing that I just want to continually strive to get better at writing so that they're representative of my students and respectful of them and attainable for them without making it too easy. So I don't have a perfect answer for that. I wish that I did, but I've continuously every year changed a little bit of my wording to try and make it right. And I'm working my way towards that, but I welcome any advice and tips and strategies on that, because I'm ever learning about goals.
Well, and I think the fact that you write them as multimodal, I really love that, because that, I'm sure that anybody who gets your students after you also loves that, because it doesn't, like you said, you're exactly right. We don't communicate in one way. So why shouldn't they receive credit, for lack of a better word, for doing that? We want them to communicate. So
exactly,
if they're using another way besides their device, then wonderful. So I love that you do that. And also the suggestions for where to with the DAG is also, I think, would be a great resource. So
yes, I love it. I pull it out every time I write goals.
Yeah. Well, and that just goes to show, I mean, we never stop learning in this field. It just, it never, and every year trying to build upon what we've learned the year before is, and I can imagine too, again, these are just even more with these complex communication learners. It just adds even much more of a challenge for writing those efficient goals. And so do you try not to do, will request, will comment, or do you try to keep them more general?
I do some commenting, requesting, protesting goals, but actually I write a goal that is communicate for a variety of communicative intents, I think, or something like that, or communicative purposes. And then my objectives are requesting, commenting, and protesting along the same lines, still incorporating the multimodal. And when I explain that to teachers and when I explain that to the parents, I like to tell them, we ideally want them to be able to do all of these. I don't care. There's not an order that I want them to do them in, but I don't want to pigeonhole a student into just a commenting goal or just a requesting or a protesting goal, because some kids or some adults really like to communicate about getting things, right? I want things. I don't care about telling you about things. I just want to get things, or I just want to tell you to go away. So I want to leave that open so that I'm not, if a kid is really wanting to tell me to go away, well, then I can still take data on that. And I don't have to say, oh, but we're not doing that today. We're working on, requesting, because that's just not real life. So that's how I kind of incorporate all those different ways of communicating as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you're saying, no, today is protesting.
Exactly.
I understand you're commenting, but that's not going to work for us today. I need you to protest. Right. It's like,
exactly.
No, you're right. That's not how life works. So yeah, keeping those goals where they're able to, they really show what the student's capable of and the progress they're making versus what we're choosing to look at that moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I think that's great. Now, one more question on this, and then we're gonna. This is a two-parter, so then everyone's gonna turn in next week. We're gonna talk about, not next week, but the next episode, where we're gonna talk about literacy in AAC and some different activities with that. But one last question on this is, how do you know when a student is ready to, like, what they're doing? They've outgrown it. They need more than they're able to communicate with what they've got, or the opposite, like we got to move down a level?
I typically don't move down. And if I have a student that has high tech, and actually our school-based core board is a lot of words actually, but I typically start all of my students that use high tech on an 80 grid. So that means there's 80 buttons on the grid. In addition, there are also navigation buttons on the side, so it's a little bit over 80. Because you want to start, in my opinion, students on the biggest grid size with the smallest buttons that they can access, given their accessibility. So all of my students are direct selectors, which means they can isolate a finger or somehow touch one button and use their hand to access it. Not all students can do that, but my students, the majority of them, are not physically involved at all, and so they are able to do that. So if you have a student that needs bigger buttons because of their access issues, that's totally a different story. But so given that, more is better, in my opinion, because then those buttons stay in the same spot. If you gradually move up from like a 5x7 grid, and then you move up to a 7x9 grid, and then you move up to an 8x10 grid, those buttons, although it's a very minimal shift a lot of the times, they're shifting and they're moving, and you might not have to scroll anymore, whereas before you had to scroll. So if for any reason I start a student on an 8x10 and it does seem a little overwhelming for them, I may hide or mask some of those buttons initially, but everything else remains in the same spot. So when you do that on those devices, when you hide buttons, that just makes them disappear from that specific location. Nothing else moves. So it just looks like a little hole is there. So that's what I would do. And I may do that if I'm working on a specific core word within a therapy session, like go or stop. I may hide some of the buttons around that to really highlight in on go, but just for that therapy session. And then when we're done and I'm moving on and that device is back for the student just for daily communication, I unhide all of that and all of their words are back. On a low tech system, what I have done is taken a core board and inside of a file folder, I should have made an example, but inside of a file folder, gluing a core board to one side and then flipping the top over the top of it, if you can imagine that. So it's kind of like you just put something in a file and it's hidden. And then kind of like masking, just cutting out around on the file folder those certain words that you may want to highlight during therapy, so that is a little bit more of a focus. But when you open it up, you still have access to all of those words. So I typically don't go down or I don't go up. I start with as big as I think it's going to be, and then we kind of just personalize it and finesse it from there. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does. It's very, very clever. That's a great option because you're right. It allows them to not change, keeps that consistency, but then slowly can add or I guess take away, but then bring back quickly if needed.
Right. It's like a temporary.
Yes.
It's a temporary thing. Yep.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that. Okay, so this is going to be the end of our first episode with you, and I want everybody to tune in to our next episode because we will be talking about AAC and literacy. So we will see you or have you join us on that one.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And that wraps up this episode. Thank you for tuning into SLP Full Disclosure. For more information about this episode, check out the show notes on our website at medtravelers.com/SLP Full Disclosure. And don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss a guest. Are you interested in becoming a travel SLP? Visit medtravelers.com to learn more and explore the exciting opportunities we offer at top-level facilities across the country. Also, a special thanks to Jonathan Carey for producing this episode and Aiden Dykes for the music and editing. And as always, this episode was powered by Med Travelers. See you next time.